So if I come on this stage 10 years ago in 2002 and asked an audience of over 100 people, how many of you are carrying a camera in your pocket right now? My guess is that the answers would have ranged from 0 to maybe 3. But I'm going to ask you now in 2012, how many people are carrying a camera in your pocket right now? Don't forget your cell phones. Okay, so now I think we're close to 100%, which says to me that photography is doing pretty well. The fact that Instagram, which is this tiny company, I think they were sitting in cubicles in one big room together until recently, was just sold to Facebook for $1 billion. And all they do is make a single photography app for cell phones, suggests to me that photography is doing pretty well. So if photography is doing so well, why did Kodak just file for bankruptcy? The answer is The Innovator's Dilemma. That's a book written by a professor at Harvard Business School named Clayton Christensen, which seeks to answer the question of why is it that what he calls disruptive innovations, or game-changing innovations, or paradigm-shifting innovations, why do they tend to come to market from a new player in that market and not from the dominant companies in the market? And Christensen explains that the reason is because the dominant companies in a market tend to become trapped by their existing customers, in particular their high-end customers. So we can look at this in photography and understand why. When you take a picture with film 10 years ago, it looks something like this. Not necessarily quite as handsome, but it depends who your subject is. But when you take that picture with a digital camera 10 years ago, it looks something like this. So who in their right mind would possibly move from film to digital photography? Well, the answer is that certain people would, because digital photography can do some things that film photography can't do. For example, you can email the pictures to your friends. You can carry hundreds of them around without making your backpack any heavier. You can manipulate them in all kinds of funny ways. So certain people, teenagers, for example, are attracted to that, and they actually prefer those features over the quality of the pictures. But teenagers aren't a very important market for photography, so Kodak doesn't really think much about them, is happy to let someone else take that market, and somebody does. Somebody comes in and creates and takes over digital photography. Well, what happens, though, and this is important, is that the picture quality starts to get better and better. And as it does, customers from film photography start to move over to digital. So first, it might be parents of young children who say, well, the pictures aren't that great, but we can email them to grandma and grandpa right away, and they really like that, so let's move over to digital. And then other customers, and it starts to move from the periphery of film photography, the people who aren't using it all that much, parents of small children, vacation photographers, then hobbyists. Finally, the picture quality is actually good enough that professionals are willing to move over to digital, because even though the pictures are still better when you use film, the clients of professional photographers really want those features too. They want the pictures delivered right away. They want to be able to manipulate the pictures on their computers. So this explains a pattern of change that's not a pattern of change from the inside out. It's a pattern of change from the outside in. And it's important to see how the change starts among customers who are really not customers of the existing product at all. And then customers of the existing product are ripped away layer by layer by layer to the new product. Let me give you another example. The iPod. When the iPod first comes to the market, if you're a computer company like Dell, you look at that and you say, that doesn't have anything to do with me. That's a music player. And it was. But that music player starts to evolve. It starts to first show pictures and videos, and then it starts to be able to take pictures and videos. Then it starts to be able to make phone calls, and it becomes a platform for hundreds of thousands of apps. And then it grows a little bit, and all of a sudden it's an iPad, and that is a comparable product to computers. And as we know, that's starting to rip away customers from laptops and from desktops layer upon layer. First, people that like to watch videos, then people that want to read emails. And as it gets better and better, it'll take away more and more customers. This is a pattern of change. And again, it's disruptive change, which comes from the outside in, not from the inside out. So what does this have to do with Judaism? The first thing that I want to note is that Judaism has seen patterns of disruptive change over and over again in its history. one of the most dramatic ones was the fact that although people think that Rabbinic Judaism came about after the destruction of the Second Temple, that's actually not right. It began while the Second Temple still stood in Jerusalem, because there were people living far away from Jerusalem who didn't get to experience the grandeur of the temple very often. They lived far away, and what the rabbis were offering was more common, more frequent, more meaningful to them, and it could take place in all kinds of areas far away from the center in Jerusalem. Sure, it lacked the grandeur of this building. It lacked the beautiful chorus of singing Levites. But it was also a lot cheaper. You didn't have to have a fancy building like this with all the cleanup costs of the blood spattering everywhere. And you didn't have to maintain an entire tribe of Jewish professionals whose livelihoods were met by sacrifice bringing and heavy taxation. So people who were participating in Second Temple Judaism begin to migrate to Rabbinic Judaism, again, from the periphery and into the core. Obviously, that's accelerated by the fact that the temple is destroyed, but it probably would have happened anyway. And throughout Jewish history, we've had change like this over and over again. I just want to mention briefly the Hasidism initially attracted the people who didn't really have the patience to sit in a yeshiva all day. Secular Zionism initially attracted poor Russians, despite the fact that the early Zionists actually were hoping that the Jewish establishments of their day would embrace Zionism. Actually, initially, they didn't. And it started with poor people who really needed it, and for whom it was a better life to imagine being a farmer going to Israel. And only later did it start to attract layer upon layer of people from the core. So what I want to suggest is that we're potentially at the brink of a disruptive revolution again today in Judaism. The science fiction writer William Gibson has a famous quote where he says, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." And I want to suggest that a lot of what we're seeing today in what we call the Jewish innovation sector, but I want to be very clear that I'm not talking only about startups. There are other organizations like Jewish summer camps, pluralistic day schools, and many others that have been established for quite a while that should be seen as part of this innovation sector. We might call it the experimentation sector, or the discovery sector, or the R&D sector. And we are seeing in that sector things going on that have the potential to become the nucleus of a next Jewish future, but that are likely to happen not from the inside out, but from the outside in. Let me give you just a couple of examples. One is the Mayim Chaim Mikveh in Boston, which is an extraordinary institution. If you go and visit it, it's beautiful. It's attractive. It has a gravitational attraction. It's hard not to love it. And in fact, people absolutely love it. They've done tremendous things with lay professional partnerships. They've empowered people to invent their own Jewish rituals. And you can imagine that from the perspective of large Jewish organizations, they say, like an iPod, well, that's just a mikveh. What does that have to do with us? But one can imagine a mikveh starting to do things that are kind of close to mikveh, weddings, bat mitzvahs, and then pre-wedding education and pre-bat mitzvah education, and then education. And then you start to build a community, all of a sudden, around a new DNA that Mayim Chaim is already built around, the DNA of empowering people to create their own Jewish rituals based on understanding deeply what the original ritual was supposed to be all about. Or take another example. A lot of parents don't want to send their kids to Jewish supplementary education for more than 1 day a week because they're concerned about competing with things like team sports and piano lessons. But actually, if you think about it, Jewish overnight summer camps are great at all of those things. They're great at sports, they're great at music, they're great at making Jewish education fun. So imagine if a Jewish overnight camp got into the Jewish supplementary education business. What if it offered a 4 or 5 day a week program that parents could send their kids to, and they would have their music lessons there. They would have their sports practices there. Maybe they would all be in Hebrew. We can imagine that growing and growing and taking away people who are currently not participating in supplementary education at all, then people who are participating but aren't enjoying it that much, and layer upon layer upon layer, finally getting closer to the core. My final example is that we have a lot of organizations out there that people think of as, well, they're attracting all those Jewish young people. I don't know exactly what's happening there, but it's not very Jewishly substantive. But I want to suggest to you that we could see the pattern that we saw there, the same pattern that we saw with digital photography, in that initially it's doing some really amazing things that the young people really love, providing them community, fun, right? The Jewish substance may not be so great, but over time, especially if we push them, if we help them, if we had, let's say, a Jewish design company like IDEO, which would come and partner with some of these Jewish startups and say, can we help you become more Jewishly substantive? Over time, they could become more and more substantive and start to pull away people who are participating first at the margins of existing Jewish organizations and then closer and closer into the core. And we could see a new Jewish community growing out of there, again, from the outside in. So what I want to suggest is that disruptive change is inevitable. Jewish history is full of disruptive change that happened from the outside in. When we see our organizations, our existing institutions in crisis, sure, we should try to see if we can help them change from the inside out, but we should also embrace change from the outside in. We should be investing in change from the outside in at a level commensurate with the possibility that it might be the Jewish future, right? It might be our best hope. So we shouldn't be investing it at a level that says, well, maybe these young people will start to get interested and then they'll join existing Jewish institutions. That's kind of a marketing budget. We should be investing on the basis of R&D, right? This could be our future. Think about the way that pharmaceutical companies pour tremendous amounts of money into R&D because they know that only by doing that might we hit the wonder drug. There are all sorts of other ways that we might invest in this sector. One that I want to talk about is, very briefly, is just the networking of the ideas that we're seeing in the innovation sector for the potential that we might, by networking not only the people, like going to conferences together, but networking their ideas, we might have something that grows that's greater than the sum of its parts. We may be able to derive a set of design principles for the next Jewish future, and that's very exciting. But I want to say one final thing about literacy, because I think that if we get excited about disruptive change, we need to rethink what we mean by literacy. Because when we talk about literacy, we tend to mean the ability of people to read. Right? In Jewish literacy, that translates to the ability of people to participate in Jewish life without feeling alienated or without not understanding what's going on. But if we think about the ultimate expression of literacy, it isn't reading, it's writing. And if we understand ourselves in a period of disruptive change, and we want to think about literate disruptors, that might be a totally different approach to literacy. Because for disruptors, it's not only important to understand what Judaism is, it's actually important for them to understand that as what Judaism has been. What we really need them to understand is the history of disruptive change in Jewish life so that they can feel empowered to know that they can make change from the outside in, and that that kind of change is authentic Jewish change. We need to be recruiting people from the outside and allowing them to be literate enough to begin the process of finding new expressions of Judaism that are interesting to other people that are outside like them. So it's not necessarily the case that people have to be fully literate Jewishly in order to begin to create the organizations that might one day be our future. It's important for them to gain that literacy over time as their organizations grow and as they be similar to the way that digital photographs begin to take on more and more quality in terms of the old understanding of what made a good photo. But they were able to do all the interesting things like emailing and all those other features without a whole lot of knowledge about engineering of the photo quality itself. That came later. We should be looking for our most learned Jews, people who have a great Jewish education, like you heard about mine, but who weren't very excited about being involved in Jewish life and were on the way out. We should be grabbing them and not pulling them back in, though. That's the mistake. We want to push them back out and teach them how to be disruptors, teach them how to resonate with people who are not feeling connected to Judaism as it is, and seeing them as the architects of those disruptive changes that are going to change Judaism from the outside in. So it's possible that the first area that we need to disrupt is the area of Jewish leadership education. Right? We need to completely rethink what it means to be a Jewish leader. Not somebody who comes in and takes over Jewish institutions and tries, even people who try to change them. But rather, Jewish leadership is going out and building the prototypes and the experiments that might become the next Jewish iPod or the next Jewish digital photograph, which can evolve and change and grow and ultimately be a new Jewish future that comes from the outside in. This can seem overwhelming, the idea of disrupting Jewish life and Jewish leadership, but it's okay to start small. In fact, the most important thing that I want you to understand about disruption is that by definition it starts in a small market, because the current customers aren't interested in it. So we can start very small and grow from there. And so let me close with Margaret Mead's wonderful quote: "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you.